Hello, everyone. I'd thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking about tree identification and its importance in arboriculture. Tree identification is pretty important for many decisions that we make during our work. Think of things such as, plant selection. The tree in the upper picture is a sycamore, American sycamore. It's the most massive growing tree this side of the Mississippi. And if you go to the Aldi in Brandon near Tampa, where I live, you'll see that tree planted in a much smaller form in a parking lot cutout no bigger than the one in the picture below. So, without having an idea of what the species is and its potential to grow in the environment, you can make some major selections with regard to planting and selection. Also, pruning is something that can be affected by species. In the Midwest and in Texas, where I was from, oak wilt's pretty prevalent, and it might come to Florida eventually. I suspect it will by the time I retire. And the major vector for that insect infects, prune wounds during its transmission period. So if you know what species of oak you're working with, which is mostly the red oak species, you can avoid pruning those trees during peak transmission period and avoid spreading the disease more than it will through root grafts and other means. Along the means of pest control, some species are very broad in their range of species, but many are host specific. The picture on the top of the screen is an emerald ash borer. You can guess that emerald ash borer is pretty specific to the fraxinus or the ash species, and it won't touch the tree below, which is a red maple. So just knowing something like that can keep you from wasting money and time protecting trees or removing trees out of fear of some of these really noxious pests that are knocking at our door. Same thing with diseases. Texas Phoenix palm decline is something that's hit the Tampa area very hard, and it's moving out through the rest of the state. These trees are very expensive. These date palms can be several $1,000s to install, and the injections are a fraction of the cost. So if you know what species you have, you can actually do some injections in these trees, kind of like a vaccination, and prevent this phytoplasma from spreading from tree to tree, and save a lot of money. And knowing what species you don't have to inject is also a savings of money. Construction protection. Often we see the biggest trees on the lot, and we're excited about keeping those the healthiest and try to maintain them for future people that are going to inhabit the area when the building's finished. But the larger the tree, usually means that they won't cope with the construction as well. But also, several species are just not tolerant of any kind of soil change. The trees that tend to be the most tolerant are the ones that are riparian. That they constantly have soil being mounded up on them with flooding events, and so there's actual guides out there based on ecology and personal experience, which show which species are most likely to survive construction damage. And these are the species, they may be smaller specimens on the site, but these are the ones you want to work on when you're trying to save trees for after construction occurs. And even if you just do pruning and removals, and that's all you do, you don't do any of the healthcare stuff, it's good to know the species, because different species have different wood densities, and different wood densities lead to different weights when it comes to removals, and you don't want to overload your rigging equipment. Here's the Sherrill tree. I think TCIA now holds this log chart, but what it is a cool little chart. It's by species and by length and diameter of a log, and you can get a pretty good estimate of the weight of that section of wood, and use that when you're calculating how much weight is going to be on your ropes and your cranes, and keeping that crane vertical will make everyone happy, the customer and yourself. Taxonomy is probably something you learned in high school biology, and what it is the classification of organisms based on characteristics that make them similar or dissimilar. there's a whole hierarchy going from the most basic, which is the kingdom. We have plants, fungi, animals, protists, which are they have a nucleus, then the Monera, which are like your very simple, no nucleus organisms. And then we get down from that very broad classification that includes those five things include everything on Earth as far as organisms, to things that are the subspecies level, like this cultivar below, this camperdown elm. You know, when you do the kingdom, the classification, you may remember the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And we're just going to walk through this a little bit and show you how that works when going through taxonomy. At the kingdom level, Plantae, you have everything in your grouping. There's no separating cacti from redwoods, and those redwood forests from the kelp forest in the Pacific, a lotus from grass, or even pond scum. As you get down a little bit further to phylum, you start getting into things that are a little bit more discerning. Here we're looking at Anthophyta, which is seed-bearing vascular angiosperms, or flowers with flowers, or plants of flowers. Going down the class, now we're going to dicotyledons. These are trees or plants that have two seed leaves at germination. Order, we're starting to see things that we're more familiar with. In Figales, you have the walnut family, the oak beech family, and the birch family, all under that order. And family is where most of our ID books begin. When you look at the organization of many of the like at least the native books in the area, they will start with like the family level for their classification. And a lot of our fact sheets have family as well. So Fagaceae, which is in Figales order, is the oak and beech family. You can see the similarity in the fruit is kind of what's tying these together here. And then when you get the genus, this is when you start getting to like the oaks or the beeches or the maples. Genuses are good if you can get down to this level. Many of our threats for pests and diseases kind of affect at the genus level, so that will help you quite a bit. And then finally you get down to species. And in this case we have Quercus virginiana, which is live oak, and the mill behind there is the authority, the person who first identified it taxonomically. Many people knew it before that, but Mill was the individual who wrote his classification down for the scientific world. When you look at nomenclature, that's the naming of plants. So we went through the hierarchy of it, but now we're naming plants, and each tree or each plant has this very specific two-part name that's unique to that plant. The first part is the genus, and the second part is a specific epithet. And both are written in italices. If you're writing it by hand, you can underline it, since it's hard to italicize your own text when you're handwriting it. The genus is always capitalized, and the specific epithet is not capitalized. Beyond those general rules for normal species, wild-type species that are just commonly reproducing in the wild, we have things that are kind of unique to arboriculture and horticulture, where humans are getting involved. So, like hybrids are a cross, like imagine a cross is an X between two species to produce some sort of species that's between the two of them, or even have some sort of hybrid vigor. So East Palaca holly is Ilex ex attenuate, East Palaca, which is the cultivar name, and it's a cross between two different hollies. I think Dehun and Vomitoria. Yupon, but don't quote me on that. And just like, and then just like animals, we can have, mules are a cross between a donkey and a horse, and they're sterile, they don't reproduce. You can have the same effect in cultivation of plants. Often you have to keep having the different parents on site to keep crossing them and getting the same hybrid, because they don't true breed those same traits after the first generation. Another example I like is called mule palm, which is a cross between the jelly palm or the pinto palm and the queen palm. So it has the traits of a queen palm, which is kind of like almost looks like a royal, which people like, but it has more cold hardiness, which is helpful in the north of the state. And like a mule, it's the cross, and it's the common name really kind of helps reinforce that. And then we also have things called subspecies. So Florida is really good for this. There's a lot of subspecies in Florida. This is one that some people either consider its own species or subspecies of sugar maple, but it's Florida maple, and often you'll see it as Acer saccharinum subspecies floridatum. And what this means is that there's a subpopulation of this bigger group of species that's specifically adapted to a growing environment. And because Florida's so hot, often we see a subspecies of Florida trees for things like maples or there's some others, but what they just tend not to do well in colder environments, but they tend to thrive here where other northern species wouldn't do as well. Varieties are true breeding. So the picture on the top is a normal honey locust, the wild type honey locust, and that's Glidicia triacanthos. There's a thornless variety that is true breeding. You can, once you get a thornless species, you can generate it from seed over and over again and use it for cultivation. So that's what makes it a variety. And I apologize for clearing my throat during this video. I'm just coming over a cold. So, and then cultivar, in contrast, those are things that humans need to cultivate themselves to keep perpetuating over and over again. They may be sterile varieties, so we need to clone them with cuttings or with things like micropropagation. Or they could just be things where the traits just don't hold up. They just don't perpetuate if you don't cut them. Things like dwarfisms or variegation and stuff like that. So common names are often used in arboriculture, I think more so than in horticulture. And usually that's sufficient if you work regionally and you stick around the area where you learned the species. That'll get you pretty far. But there's some problems with common names, and here's one of them. This is one of my favorite trees from Illinois, and actually we have it down here in Florida as well. It's an understory tree in the forest, and it's Carpinus caroliniana, and I learned it as musclewood. And if you look at that stem in the top picture, you can see it has like a muscular appearance to it, which is just, it's beautiful. It's a very hard wood, so other people call it ironwood. And it has kind of a beech-like leaf, so some folks will call it blue beech because it has kind of a blue tint to the bark. Then other people call it American hornbeam, and I just don't know where that one comes from. I'm not familiar with the origin of that. But you can see here if you don't use the nomenclature, the two-part name, the Carpinus caroliniana, you could get into some confusion when ordering and specifying trees based purely on common name. There's American hop hornbeam too, which is a completely different species. So it really helps to get to the Latin name when you're looking at plants on plant finders and things like that to make sure that you are truly getting what you want. Another problem with common names is they can be shared between different species. So all three of these are tulip tree. There's an African tulip tree, the one in the top. There's tulip poplar, the yellow flower on the left, and then this magnolia cross. Remember, this is a hybrid here with the X in there. That is also a tulip tree, and it's all based on the shape of the flower. So if you're just specifying one, you may get the wrong species just because you're using common name. And then there's also this fake or wrong named species. These things can be named wrong because We learned later on through DNA testing that they're more closely lined up with different species, or maybe someone just had a different reason for naming them. Like bald cypress is not a true cypress; kind of looks like a cypress, but when you see this, if there's a hyphen between the descriptor and the species name, so silk hyphen oak, or if it's all run together like bald cypress, where it's one word, not a space, we know that it's not a true oak or not a true cypress. So I talked about oak before. When you see the silk oak, most of the oaks, I mean all the oaks are genus Quercus, and you're not concerned of getting oak at all if you have a silk oak, because that's not even the same genus. So it's good to know these things, and mountain ash, that's another fake one. You wouldn't worry about emerald ash borer for that species. So knowing the true species and knowing the actual name for it and what these hyphenated names, common names mean, and the ones that are run together, can help you with proper identification and care and cultivation. When identifying trees, we often look at things like the leaves. This is southern magnolia on the left. Has a very distinct leaf. It's what we call entire margined and simple, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more. But the really defining feature are the glossy tops and the brown pubescent undersides. And not every magnolia has this. Not every southern mag has it. If you go in the wild, this varies. But the ones in cultivation, people have selected specifically for that pubescence because it's so outstanding looking in contrast with the bright green on top. For things like palms, we're looking at how many leaflets are there, how are they arranged, like a palm shape, or are they like a feather shape, and then the different things like spikes on the petioles and things like that. For our conifers, things we can look at are needle clustering, and if you see clusters of needles, you're working with a pine of some sort, or maybe like a tamarack or a larch if you're further north. And then if you're looking at single-borne needles, you're looking at things like spruces and firs, which we tend to only see around Christmas time here, with Christmas trees. And then we have a lot of interesting things that are like our cedars and things like that, which are more just unique shapes. And bald cypress, they have awl-like and feather-like leaf shapes. Bark can be a very defining feature. If anyone's seen a silk floss tree, the tree on the left here, it just has this beautiful metallic green bark and is often spotted with these really dark, sharp, but rounded thorns. Things like sand live oak, less distinctive but still telling. The blocky, thick bark that this oak has. Also an indication that it's kind of fire resistant. A lot of oaks have thick bark that insulate them against fires, and that helps them stay in a savanna-like state. And then things like river birch here has a beautiful peeling pink to gray bark that eventually, as the tree ages or you get to older stems on the tree, will turn into like a gray potato chip, kind of like just potato chips stuck to the side of the tree looking bark. Flowers, people never care about flowers until the tree is in flower, and then everyone wants to know what it is. So if you have a good guidebook that shows flowers, that can help you quite a bit with your identification. Things like bottle brush, you know where that gets the name right there. When you see the flower, it looks like something you'd clean a test tube out with. Some trees that are more like red maple has really pretty flowers, but they're very small, and you have to get up really close to see them. But when you do see them, you can see the red structures give the species its name. And then oleander has a very complex flower compared to many trees, and it's one of the defining traits for the species and why people plant it. Flowers are great, but they don't always persist that long, and fruit and seeds tend to persist a little bit longer, unless they're extremely edible. Then birds will pick them off as soon as they change color. Here's sea grape. It used to be my favorite tree until I parked underneath it in South Florida and had parrots fly over. It was quite a mess, but it's an edible seed that even we can eat with a lot of sugar in jam or whatever. Things like achote have a very unique capsule and I mean almost like a smiling Muppet mouth with seeds inside of it. Golden trumpet tree. When these things are loaded, there's this dangly furry tendrils all over the tree, and it's a very definable feature because they're usually not in leaf fully when this occurs, and it's the one thing you can go on. So you can look at form as well. Things like earpod tree or Delona regula, like Royal Pensiana. They have a very sweeping, wide, savanna-like form, which you can tell from distance. Other things like Italian cypress, they're very pencil-shaped, up and down cypress, and this makes them easier to tell apart. If you looked at the foliage between like a red cedar and an Italian cypress, it might be kind of hard to tell the difference. But when you see the form, you can tell instantly which one is which because of this the very distinct pencil shape of the Italian cypress. Other defining features, cypresses have knees. So, if you see knees around the tree trunk, it could be either a pond cypress or a bald cypress, most likely a bald cypress. And these things only form in low oxygen environments, so compacted soils or saturated soils. And we really have no idea what they do, but they do show up. If you had like really well-drained soils, you wouldn't even have this issue. Wingdome has corky winged appendages on them, which is where its name comes from. Sweetgum's another tree that has this, but not nearly to the level that Wingdome has it, which gives them kind of an interesting seasonal interest. Even in the winter, you can see these things, and it's kind of it's pretty, especially in the north when you get snow. That tends to collect snow and give it a nice look to it. When you get a tree ID book, you'll find that most of them here in the state are broken up to broadleaf, conifer, and palm. Those are the three sections you'll find. I have a couple tree books of my own, and that's the format that I found as well. And for broadleaves, and actually for everything, but mostly for the broadleaves, you'll see that the next thing that we do when we're trying to break down the species and help people find the right tree is we go to leaf arrangement. You see here the three main options are alternate, and you can see that the leaves for alternate go kind of staggered, like one way, and then a little bit further up there'll be another one going the other way, and then the other, and the other. And don't be fooled by this. They're not flat like that. They often kind of twirl around in a spiral. This is the artist rendering. But you won't have more than one leaf coming from any one point. That's the key thing. Opposite arrangement means that there's two leaves coming from a given point. And these are less common. The mad horse would be maples, ashes, dogwoods, horse chestnuts. And you could put crepe myrtles in there as well. So when you find this arrangement, you're a step ahead of the rest of if you had like an alternate. Because alternate, there's a lot of things that are alternate, and you have to wade through a lot. But when you get to opposite, there's much fewer options, and it makes it easier to identify if you can recognize this. I would look at buds and newer growth for this because over time one of those leaves could break off. And you won't always have perfect opposite arrangement, but when you look at the new growth, it will be what it looks like right here. And then world is kind of the weird one. Like when you find a world tree, like a catalpa or oleander's kind of subworld, it's kind of like finding the person with glasses and Guess Who. You really know, you've really narrowed down the field at this point, and you should be happy when you find that. When you look at leaf arrangement, you need to know what a leaf is, and is it a compound leaf or is it a simple leaf? A simple leaf, the way you look is you look at the petiole and where it attaches to the twig, and that can be a little tough when the growth is young because they'll both be green, but there will be a bud at the base of that leaf, and sometimes it'll be even inside the petiole for like things like yellowwood, but there will be a bud there. And that's where the leaf ends. And that's really important because, if you looked at the compound leaf on the right, and you only like ripped off this piece of the leaf, the very tip of it, then you won't have the whole picture. Because the guidebook's going to say it's a you know compound leaf with 7 to 9 leaflets, and you will think you have a simple leaf, and you'll be totally off the wrong track. So, and this is something that when I was working on my tree books, like the designer, we'd run into trouble where she'd get very artistic and just focus on a certain part of the leaf, and then miss the whole story, and you kind of need that. So, and once you figure out what a leaf is, you need to know how it's arranged. Compound leaves have different. Simple leaves have one arrangement, but compound leaves can have several different forms. You can have pinnate, which is kind of that feather-like shape on the left there. Bipinnate, you have, instead of just leaflets coming off either side of the main rachis, which is an extension of the petiole, you have a second branching, a second set of rachi that lead to like a double branching, like there's leaflets on rachi on the main rachi. And there's actually a species in Florida called horseradish tree that is tripinnate. So there's another level of breakdown, and when you see that, you know exactly what the species is, because that's very rare. We have palmate leaves, which look like a palm, where all the leaflets come from one spot. And then when we get to the palm trees, like the actual our palm species, we look for things like costopalmate leaves versus palmate. So a costopalmate leaf are things like our sable palms here in the Caribbean area, and that means the petiole kind of goes straight into the leaf, and it continues a little bit. It doesn't end, and it'll often curve the leaf a little bit, and so it just keeps going up. It doesn't just terminate like that leaflet in the bottom picture, the palmate one. It just goes up a little bit further, and you see the costa marked in that picture at the top. As I said before, single versus clustered needles for conifers. Anything clustered is a pine, generally. And single-needled conifers could be things like the podocarpus that we have in the picture right there. You can have scaly foliage and all-like foliage. So scaly, you can see looks like scales on a lizard. All-like, you're thinking like a punch-awl for like metal work or leather work, something very sharp. If you put your hand on those branches, and you kind of pushed on them and squeezed them, you would feel them go into your hand a little bit, and you would know why they're called all-like. They're very triangular shaped, and there's tend to be like more than one leaf shape for trees that have all-like foliage. It tends to be a little bit more feathery and older growth. So there's names for leaf margins. So the edges of leaves. We have things like ciliate, which have fine hairs. Crenate, which have round teeth. Dentate, sounds like dental, right? Have just symmetric teeth. Entire, when you have simple entire leaves, so one that's football shaped, one leaf, and has this entire margin. There's so many things in Florida that have that. You have a lot of work cut out for you. And then like double serrate, I love this one. It's serrations on serrations, and that river birch I showed you with the pink bark before. That's one of the species that has that, and it's just pretty. There are names for leaf bases. The one I like here is oblique. If you look at that one in the top right, you'll see that one side dips down lower than the other. It's not symmetrical. And that's very definitive in the elms. So American elm and then our winged elm down here. If you didn't see the wings, you would know it's an elm just based on that. There's also names for leaf apices. So I like the ubcordate because things like orchid tree have that, and it's a real good tell on the species. And then a lot of the tropical trees will have caudate or acuminate tips. And what these are special extensions that allow water to drip off the leaf, so they don't rot. They're from high humidity, high rain areas, and that's a survival mechanism to keep their foliage from getting diseased. Every good book will have all these things standardized and defined. This is from my book. I used all the same. There's some terms that are synonyms of each other, and we just picked the one that we liked the best, and then we defined it and showed a picture of it so that there'd be no confusion and people would have something to go with. So when you're looking at a tree ID book, look for something like this, because you need to know the terminology that they're using before you really effectively use the book and can use it to identify trees. One thing I want to show you here is Revolute. This is something that defines live oak from its common cousin, the laurel oak. When you see this is our artist rendition of it, but what it is the leaf curls like a cup or like a spoon, and if you turn that leaf over, it would be spoon shaped in your hand. So that's Revolute. There's a lot of field guides out there. These are some of the good ones for Florida, not including the ones that I've worked on. What I like though is there's a lot that are native trees of Florida, but there are so many non-native trees in urban areas, and so many invasive species that even if you work in natural areas, you want to know that I tend to stay away from anything that's just natives only, because you're missing the most common species of dwelling tree in the Tampa Bay area is Brazilian pepper, and if you had a native-only book, you wouldn't even know that that's what it is, even if it is just to know what it is to remove it. So I tend to stay away from native-only books because while they're interesting, there's so many things that are introduced to the state that they're not very helpful. Be very careful when you buy a book. There's a lot of national books out here. This one's from the Arbor Day Foundation. If you look at the range map below, what's missing from that picture? All of the state of Florida. So, especially South Florida, you guys have it really rough trying to find guides. And this is Brazilian pepper, as I mentioned. Like if it's not in your book, you'll not know what that is. So, and then I said that most books start organization at the family level, and that's great, but I've seen some books where that's all they have for organization. They don't have any of the characteristics for leaf, traits or any sort of key to help you find the species. So if you don't know the family of the tree you're looking at, you'll never be able to find the tree to identify it. So it's kind of useless as a identification tool. It might be good as a desk reference, but you want some sort of key or some sort of way to find things based on plant characteristics. And these are some of the best books. I don't want to plug mine too much, so these are some alternatives. These have great illustrations of the leaf, and they often have fruit and flower pictures. And all of them have dichotomous keys, which we'll show you in a different video, which you can use to it's like a choose your own adventure to find out what a species is of an unknown type. So here's the dichotomous key. You can see here, you go to the first question, it says tree is broadleafed or tree is not broadleafed, and you just is it a broadleaf tree? Is it a shade tree of some sort, or is it a palm tree, or is it a conifer? And if it's a broadleaf tree, you go to 2. And its leaves and buds are opposite. We're already getting to the opposite again, like I mentioned before, or leaves and buds are not opposite. And if it's opposite arrangement, you're lucky and you have to go to 3. If it's not opposite, you have to go down the list all the way to 22 and continue on with your adventure. But you look at 3, there's only a few species that are opposite. And for your module this week, we're going to do a dichotomous key tutorial. And one of your assignments will be to key out a species. And so this is the guide that we'll be using for that. My book, so this is one of my books. I have a South Florida book as well. We not only have the key that you saw a couple pages back, but our table of contents is a truncated key. So you can see here that if you have a broadleaf, you go to 1, and then you can look. Simple leaves we start at 2. Compound leaves we start at page 28, and then when we're in the simple leaf section, you can go right to the leaf margin that fits your tree. So, and we're very diligent about this. None of these categories have more than 20 species in it. So at least have a 1 in 20 chance of getting it right if it's in the book. So here's another example of that. This is the book by Kirk, and you know, very similar layout. I think I've seen this in several books, and I think it's the best for a field guide. So again, these are the two books that I've worked on, and what we did is we actually used inventory data from past studies to make sure that we had the most common species. We looked at like plant ant as well, the wholesaler website, to make sure that we were getting the most common plus some of our favorite trees that we saw, like cannonball tree, which are a little bit more rare but are interesting. It's pocket sized, great pictures. Gita, you know, Asing, my technician, took the pictures, and she's got a gift. Just a plug for them. Showing some of her artwork and some of the folks that worked on it, and just some examples of the pages. You know, anything that we could think of that was defining. Like, look at this is sea grape again, one of my favorite trees. Look at the red veins on that, the round waxy leaf, the young leaf, how it emerges bright red like that. We wanted all of this in our book to show people and give them the most identification information they could get for the money. And we didn't mind breaking rules. This is screw pine. Seeds hyphenated, so it's not a real pine, which you probably knew, but pine comes from pina, which is like a pineapple. See the fruit. It's just a total mess when it comes to taxonomy here for the common name. And people assume that it's a palm tree given its full form. You can see that in the picture below. So we put it in the palm-like plant section just so people would find it, but it's really just a broadleaf tree, you know. But I think I looked at this book from a novice point of view, and I was willing to break rules in taxonomy to put things together. Another thing, like Austrian pine. If you've ever seen that tree, Casuarina, it's a broadleaf tree, and the leaves are so tiny you can't see them, and it looks like the petioles are needles. We put those in the conifer section, even though they're technically a broadleaf tree. We also have an app, if folks are app interested. This is for Android and Apple. And, we have all the same information, all the same pictures. They're not even cropped, which makes them even better. And then we have, the key is just interactive. You get to choose your own adventure. Here's some of the pictures. You can see no cropping, which is something you have to do to fit things in a book. And it's beautiful. This is a live oak here in Tampa on USF campus. Here's our key. You just tap top or bottom, whichever one is right. If you don't know what a tree is, you can hyperlink it and go to the glossary. There may not be help for you at that point, but it's an option. And yeah, so we have a South Florida version as well. So I'm going to have another video on using a dichotomous key, and thank you for your patience with this.